Hi everyone, this is Karak with ACG and welcome to another episode of Walking the Walk, where we jump into a game and see if the artistic and gameplay presentation equals the original developer promise. Today's title is Fallout 4, a game that released with not a small amount of criticism about its gameplay, graphics, and just its overall presentation, but has already ended up winning many Game of the Year awards, and I think it's going to be an interesting title to discuss. Now, remember, this is for the most part an artistic and world discussion about the gameplay, development, and worldview. It's not a technical discussion. Will I talk about graphics? Yep. Will I discuss which version of Fallout 4 is best, or whose digital manhood measuring matters most? Nope. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe, maybe tell some people about it, maybe share it somewhere. Now, right away, one of the first things I want to discuss when it comes to Fallout 4 is world creation. There's some unique things that occurred here in Fallout 4 that didn't occur in the previous Fallout games when it comes to the creation, and I think that for many gamers, you can actually notice that subtle difference. First of all, we already know that behind the scenes, they sent people to Boston, took some pictures, and did all of that collection that we've seen resourced in other titles like Witcher 3 and Watch Dogs, where people go to locations and take jaunts out into the wilderness or out into the cityscape so that they can get a general idea. But what's really interesting about what happened with Fallout 4 is they ended up going to Boston and taking a lot of pictures. Now, one of the interesting bits is as they were taking pictures of colonial areas and stuff like that, many of those locations that they were taking pictures of were actually built after the supposed drop of the bomb date that's within the Fallout 4 universe. And I think that in some ways you can see some of those aspects. You know, this is a really unique title in the Fallout series when you really consider it, because we're actually seeing the bombs dropped and we're actually getting to live that moment and then popping out here. And I'll discuss the dichotomy and that unique richness that comes up with being able to see the prior world and the future world now. I think that there's some really cool aspects there. One of the first things when I talk to people and I find out somebody doesn't like Fallout, I love to ask them why. There's usually two reasons. The first being the color filter that the Fallout games always seem to employ. You know, even Witcher 3 does this, where they have a color filter, and what that color filter does is it offers an overall ambiance to the world, a difference within the structure of the world when it comes to the color between you and whatever object there is. Because let's remember that even though air looks apparently invisible, in fact, there are multiple things in it, whether it be pollen or just dust. And so a lot of times people will put a color filter in the game. You know, blue is a crisp color, an icy feeling to it, where maybe a green is noxious and it also means claustrophobia. It gives a claustrophobic feeling many times. It's very intrinsically tied into science that people, humans, have a very real reaction to light and shades of light. And so that's why you have a lot of people modding out the color spectrum that occurs within the Fallout games or within Witcher 3, changing their own EMBs, removing saturation, adding saturation, you know, doing all these different things that they can to a picture to get it to appear the way they want. Now, jumping away from graphics for a second, one thing I have to say when it comes to sound, though I'm overall very happy with the sound within this game and have done some studying up on the people who worked on it, and I think that their sound effects are overall good, I'm really not very happy with a lot of the sound effects when it comes to your character moving. You can pass through mud puddles that are quite large and you won't hear any water sound. Different areas don't really have that variance that you need, that variability that really gives you a visceral feeling of living within a game world. I mean, let's be honest. In your own house, you may have 4, 5, 6, 7 different surfaces that you walk on, and your brain can tell you, even if you had your eyes closed, where you were simply by the sound of your feet. This is one of my favorite points, the differences between light and dark here, where, you know, Fallout does such a great job of offering mystery. You know, is that light a safe place? Is it a safe haven? And we'll talk about safety versus danger as overall themes within Fallout versus some other games, and I can give you examples of games where that actually isn't the sub-themes. But I love these locations. There's always something going on. However, that can, to many gamers, look ultimately disheveled or chaotic, and I get that. And I want to explain a little bit about why I think Fallout 4 maybe has that a little bit more than other games, but also the Fallout series does. And I think most people will be able to follow along, and they'll probably already understand this at an instinctual level at the very least, if not just from a game design situation and level. When you are looking at Fallout 4, you are looking at an inherently slightly different world than you are in, let's say, Witcher 3 or most other open world games, GTA. Now, why is that? Well, it's very simple when you think about it, but it's actually I think it's so different in this title that it can be lost. Let's look for a second at Witcher 3 and GTA. You are playing characters that have lived within that world in a society that has lived within that world for a continual pattern and period of time. And so there's a very real, lodged in, legendary, historic feeling of that location and of that place. Same thing with Elder Scrolls, same thing with any of their titles. There's a very real, lived in feeling for the denizens of that area as well as its architecture. Now, here's the thing about Fallout 4. The reflection of the world state is itself reflecting 200 years ago in its architecture. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when we talk about separation of church and state, separation of wild and tamed lands within Witcher, or high, low, and middle incomes within Watch Dogs or GTA 5. Well, when it comes to Fallout 4, the separation of the architecture from its actual living human base is something that you notice, and I think that that can look odd. For example, you get things that just don't appear like they should be in the place where they are. You get cars in areas they shouldn't be because of nuclear blasts throwing them around. You get all of these unique, strange things. And what you have is you have a overall set of architecture, of buildings, designs, even these electrical power lines that are all built for a civilization 200 years ago that got its bombs dropped on it. And so what's happened is, after, a certain amount of time, people started moving back into these areas, ignoring some radiation and not the longer lasting radiations, and started to rebuild. But the impact that they will make in, 5, 6 generations is actually not as much as people think. I've heard people say, oh, it's been 200 years, why hasn't everybody banded together? Or why hasn't this or that happened? Well, let's be honest. You can't really tie that into normal history discussions, because the plain and simple fact is, during normal history discussions, nobody ever says, hey, there's a giant super mutant with a minigun taking out people in your fucking backyard. You have to take some things into that fantasy feeling, and you have to understand the environment's variability. I mean, a good way to think of it is this. Most worlds, all things are built and used in a continued line, but in Fallout, the effective reuse of materials, items, land, and equipment has really left the previous skeleton of one world right beside the new cannibalistic constructions of the new one. And indeed, 200 years, 200 years is a certain amount of generations. It's not a ton, depending on the severity of the attack, various population numbers in particular areas. But here, this isn't the slow decline of a nation or empire on its own. This is instant Armageddon. 200 years later now, living in shacks and having a couple larger cities seems absolutely accurate in my book when it comes to just brutal destruction instantly. Recovering from nuclear devastation without super mutants would really be slow, and any level of technological progress to increase those 200 years would really be slowed down. Now, on the east side of the coast, I started out at that lighthouse, and I just love all of the H.P. Lovecraft little hints that go on in this game. There's a lot of mystery in this game, and I can talk about depth, I think, right now. It'd be a good time to talk a little bit about depth and breadth of the game. Some people have compared it to Skyrim Light, which a lot of people don't think Skyrim's that deep, but I would actually go with that. I think that within Skyrim, especially some of those dungeons and stuff, even though there's some fairly in-depth, deep constructions here and factories, when it comes down to it, Fallout has always made me feel like there's a wide world to explore with a little bit of hints here and there and a little bit of things to keep your memory mesmerized at that exact time and really solidify you there and concrete whatever memory they want to concrete of that location. So you do end up impacting that map mess that we've talked about in prior games, but it's not at the level, and its experience that you do at the time is enjoyable enough and different enough that many times you have a fairly good memory of whatever occurred. Well, discussing how they put these interesting things in the game really shocked me to see how they did it. What they ended up doing is they had teams of people play Fallout 4. And what those people would do, they didn't have heat maps like some places would do. They actually had people take notes, and they would walk from one end of the land to the other, and they would take notes on places that were too cluttered, not cluttered enough, too busy, not busy enough, and of course some other variables. And then what they did is they fed that back in, and then people adjusted the world. And I think when it comes down to it, they had enough people that the average is probably really solid. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, some people just have different levels of acceptance for different variables. Some people will want the game to be more chaotic, and some will want it less so. We see that within mods, especially for the PC, where you have all manner of adjustments to how many creatures are spawned or what's going on within the game world. It's completely normal, and I think, again, it is within the average. I really do think that the overall level design and the design of the civilization itself within Fallout 4 speaks truly and naturally of how we know civilizations would progress after a massive Armageddon, but again, adding in that fantasy element of the sciences we don't know and don't understand. This is just Such a cool place. I love, again, the light there, that mystery. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump to the starting location. I think that this is a really awesome place to sort of break down some of the world building that occurs within Fallout 4. We can jump there and we can discuss what it's like in that first vertical slice of the title. You know, in a weird way, it's like a choose your own adventure. When you come out of here, you can go left, you can go right. And in a way, it really speaks to the gamer. You can go towards that dead set of trees or down back the way you came. But even more so here is that future past, past future feeling that you get here, because at the starting of the game, you got to see the world before the bombs dropped. And I think that that is absolutely the most concrete moment within the title. Just that little slice where you got to see a normal life and what was going on. And, well, why do I think that's so important? I think it's so important because the other titles just haven't done that. In fact, Fallout 3, I know many people did like that first vault starting area, but I did not. I actually found it very slow, and it didn't connect me with the game world as much as I would have liked. Here, there's that just absolutely instinctual, almost unbelievably connected feeling you have of the world. You just walked up here, and this was all green and a paved road, or not a paved road, a dirt road. These people were in line to get into that bunker, and this all looked different. And then to you, just a couple moments have passed, one single cutscene, and now boom, you're here, and you're going back the way you came. And again, you can go left, which is sort of like telling for what kind of player you are. If you go left, which is not the way you came up to this area, then you're going into new territory you've never seen. Maybe you're more of an explorer. If you go right, you want to look at what's happened to your past that has been destroyed now. I love this scene here. I talk about it in many games. I've talked about it. I think the first time I mentioned it was probably one of the first Walking the Walks, maybe Far Cry 4, is that verticality for memory, where there's very clear sciences that point out, especially for locations, that the human brain has an easier time the more variability there is in a location remembering it. And so many games will have you vertically enter a location, drop down into it, or raise into it. And one of the great things about this, I loved in Skyrim, for example, when you come out of the bear cave and you sort of exit out of the bear cave and the world is in front of you, and you, this explorer, are coming out from success. You've had your first success and you're coming out from success into this world and lowering down into it. Here, it's this barren feeling. You're lowering down into it, but you remember getting out of it. You remember running up that hill. And so there's this really almost subtle feeling of duality that goes on there, as long as, you know, you play it like I do, where you do go to the right. If you go to the left, there's a different feeling for this initial entry. But I love that vertical entry. You'll see it, I'm going to be honest, I think Bethesda overuses it a lot in their territory, how they build their territory. Almost all of their main areas you drop down into. I mean, that's just, whether it be the original Fallout 3, you know, town, or whether it be even the major city here where you're in the Colosseum and you go down into it. Their design seems to just be attracted to that. It's true that Fallout 4 doesn't use the highest resolution textures in any version. I'm running this on Ultra here on the PC, and, you know, I can still see some low resolution textures. But there's a really cool feeling that they go about how they use those low resolution textures. And unless you're looking, many times you can walk around without really eyeing them or keenly looking at them. Like, you can walk across that grass and not notice the dirt that's very low resolution, as long as you're just continually moving forward. Again, this world spawns rubber tires. I've talked about this in podcasts. I'm not quite sure what goes on there. Originally, the Fallout 4 developers had a problem where the modelers were putting too many items like rubber tires and cars in the world's levels, and they had to go back and look and see if they could fire their imagination. Unfortunately, I think they should have removed more. Now, here's something. I just love this. In many games, when you reuse assets, people know and they have an issue with it. Of course, the cannibalism of the current items to create future items here is actually what you want. This is a swing set. It's even got the little rings for the chain to go into, and you can see on swing sets, this is basically one of those parts. Also, it's also used, I believe, in hanging of clothes. And I love that reuse of that model. There's something, the first time I saw it, I'm like, I'm sure I've seen that somewhere in this game before, and I love that. No, again, in any other game, you'd see a reused model or asset, and you'd be like, why is that being done like that? You know, you'd have an issue with it. Here, of course, you want that. It gives you the feeling of resources being moved, which is right in the reflection of life. Resources, funds, whatever it may be, moving from place to place is quite literally one of the biggest reflectors of something living within an area. I mean, if you look at anything, if you look at humankind, civilizations moving into different territories, that's how you can tell, is the removal of resources to build new things, and that cannibalism that we see. And I think, unfortunately, you can see where it doesn't hit. For example, this car here, I think that's a very poor game design. You have a world where people are scrounging different things, and you have this car here with multiple good parts on it, and it's just sitting there. And that happens a lot of times in Fallout 4. And I think that, as I spoke earlier, where they had admitted that some of the developers who were working on this when it first came out, and some of the artists and the designers putting stuff within the game, they might have put some things in areas that didn't make sense. As always, the air of mystery continues. This car wreck, one of the first mysteries you see visually in the game, if you follow the typical path, which is to go to the right. You know, how did it get there? Did it drive off, or did this get crushed and it fall off? Did it, was it just the explosion and it flipped off of this bridge due to the wind and heat and explosion from that initial nuclear blast? There's so many different mysteries within Fallout 4, and we're even coming up on one, but it's, I think, a little bit more brutal, a little bit more in your face, of course. The dude with the crowbar in the side of the dog. For some reason, I love reflections of the past in physical form like that, where your brain fills in so many blanks. It's like, what exactly happened there? There's a very real texture to a game world when that happens. Now, personally, if you ask me what is one of my favorite starting locations in any video game, I would instantly say Fallout 4. And that's above Fallout 3. It's equal to Skyrim. I really like the starting of Skyrim. I absolutely adored the starting of Morrowind on the prison ship. But coming through that little town and coming here to the Red Rocket, there is something so iconic to this. This is where dreams are made, as I like to joke around. What I really mean is this is where screenshots are made. Remove the guy, zoom in, take a screenshot. This kind of stuff would be a great background. I think that's one of the things that comes up when you're talking about the game world and the icons that you see is compression. Compression usually means taking the distance between two different spots and compressing it, shortening it down a little bit to make it appear realistic within the game world, even though it's not. I discussed compression pretty much in detail with Witcher 3, somewhat in Watch Dogs, in GTA, and Far Cry 4, and in any of the games I try to at least discuss it a little bit. And I don't really like the technical term compression, because I think that many times you can get confused and assume that that's about the entire game, or that it's technical. It seems to be a shared word that's a little difficult, and so I don't like to hammer it down to one single word. But basically, yeah, it's the shortening of distance. It's when you truncate the distance between point A and point B to fit it within your world. And some worlds, as I discussed in The Witcher 3 Walking the Walk, in some worlds when they truncate, they end up having sharper inclines and declines because they want to get you that memory of verticality as you move through a game world, but at the same time they have a shorter distance to use it. And once again, we have the tires breeding on the left here. There are a lot of locations within Fallout 4. It does appear to be, I would say, really packed with items. But when it comes down to it, I think that they did a good job of making sure that each place was still unique enough and still slightly cut off from another place. In fact, you'll notice that many places within Fallout 4 may have just the smallest hill, and it's a little, you can definitely tell it's a little trick. There may be a rock or a hill, something very small between two distinct points, and the reason why is to break up that visual busyness at times and really make it feel like over every hill there is something, which first of all is really good for any gamer. They like that. But also the fact that you don't come up over a hill and there's so much stuff that your brain turns off and just decides, there's just too much there. In my save game a long time ago, I released that dog, and he's just now making his way back. At the starting of this video, I talked about colored lighting and the filtering that you get when you're playing the game and how that can impact the atmosphere and emotion that a player feels. I like the fact that Todd Howard basically not only said that Fallout 3 was a brown simulator, but that they had tried to add color to Fallout 4. And I would seriously challenge anybody to not draw a very subtle comparison, especially when looking at the museum areas and a couple of the older downtown areas. A very close resemblance at times to BioShock Infinity's pastel color palette, especially on the paintings. Now, I think they probably already always have had that, but the adding of that, in addition to the lighting of the world being more colorful, sort of matched together, and it becomes a little bit more forceful to the eye, and I really liked it. I think that it sort of evoked this odd BioShock familiarity within the Fallout 4 title, and I don't mean that in any way. They weren't cribbing. I don't think they were copying. In fact, I think it was wholly a positive. I think it absolutely helped out. So we're going to go ahead and jump to another area. It's one of my favorite areas, and I wanted to sort of walk you guys through it and explain some of the transitions in the game, Reflection of Life as well, but some of the different transitions you see here. And boom. Now what I wanted to do is jump us into one of the swamp areas, and there's a very different reason for that. Something that I noticed when I was playing Fallout 4, and different even so than Fallout 3, and that's the transition that they do in this title from swampy landed area to original hard ground areas to buildings and foundations. And again, taking into account that things have exploded, there is a really high fantasy feel to a lot of this transitioning, and I can really see that bothering some people. It actually does appear a little fake. There is some times when you're running around looking at a place and you're like, man, there is an incredible amount of upheaval that apparently happened between the schoolyard and this bus over here. You know, that does happen. I still really enjoy this area. I think the transitions are very truncated, though, and we're going to see that almost in any area that has a swamp, or we will also see that in the area which is the Green Sea, I think it's called, which is the heavily radioactive area as well. You do have that feeling of things being much tighter in these locations, and I do get that in real life this can occur. It just seems to occur within the entire title. I just think it's funny. I think I explained it to another gamer that I said when all the bombs dropped off, apparently they exploded and shot bulldozers everywhere, which then dug up the earth and put hills in some places and just absolutely changed the entire structure of the earth, which would happen to a certain degree. But, you know, we see what appears to be far more natural hilliness and stuff like that than you know, you would see from an explosion going off. Again, that's game design. You have to do some of that. I love this lighting here. Just look at this. You can see 3 or 4 points of interest just sheerly by the light that they pass through this deserted area. That's so great. I think I'll go up here towards the Aurora Foliatus. When walking and enjoying and just adventuring within Fallout 4, gamers will feel that there is a particular area in any game, Fallout 4, Witcher 3, any of the big open world games. Many people will feel that there's a location that seems to be overtly specific to the main character sort of existing within that title, whether it be Balmora from Morrowind, which many people, that's all the farther they got. Balmora was such a uniquely large city and stuff like that. Any of the Elder Scrolls games always have that one city, Whiterun, for example. And here in Fallout 4, of course, you do have that. What they are is they're anchor points, basically, and that's one particular term that goes on in game development. It can be multiple things, but anchor points, they're almost like gravity wells. Think maybe getting caught and pulled into the gravity of a planet, but instead of gravity, it's sort of replaced by quests, and planets are the cities. And so what happens is those quests continually happen in those larger cities, and you end up having players gravitate around. Now, what's really cool is depending on how many anchor points you have, it's very hard to describe, but imagine dropping 2 or 3 rocks in a very shallow creek, and you can see the water go around to the left of one rock. Let's say you drop something in the water and you can trace it, and then maybe it goes to the right of the rock below it, and then to the left, and then to the left, and then to the right. Now, if you take those rocks and you pretend that they're cities, that's how a quest can work. And many times a quest will be made so it brings you to another place, which then opens up a quest, which then maybe reverts you back to the original anchor point, which then unleashes a new quest. And those, again, are called anchor points. In Fallout 4, one of the things I noticed is that there's not an abuse of anchor points, but there seems to be less than I would have assumed for this title. In Fallout 3, I felt that there were a couple anchor points, but and one you can, I don't want to, not spoilers, the game's been out for years, but one you can blow up. But I think that the anchor points were a little less important, but they were a little bit more defined. Here in Fallout 4, it feels to me like there's only one or two real good anchor points in the title, and places like this, they seem almost too barren. And I've talked to many gamers who have said the same thing, that they feel that it feels to be a more barren game, which is funny when you think about it, because most of the time the new technologies would allow you to fill a game with more items, more enemies, more NPCs. It does feel more barren, and I actually accept that, and I think that makes sense. Yet, when you look at the one addition that they did for this title, I think that also makes sense game design. And that addition is, of course, making your own outposts. One thing we know is that the outposts were originally planned to be a mod later. DLC, basically. They were not planned to be in the main game. And then they got into the main game, and they were continually being threatened with being cut before the title was released. I can actually see, especially when you look at where you can build settlements, where you can build outposts, and you look at the main areas, the main anchor points, you can actually see that within the game design, the plan was for the player to create their own anchor points. So the unique worldview, I think, makes sense. It may not be excellent, it may not feel the best when it comes to feeling sometimes like you've traveled out of your way and there's really nothing to wherever you go except for that one single quest point. I still think it feels natural overall. Really good sound mixing here, where you see that lightning go off and then just a moment later you hear it. Not enough to feel disconnected from one another, but just enough to make you feel like, oh, that's real. There is that slight hesitation between the flash and the sound. Now, of course, here you hear the sound effects of you walking through the water. Like I said prior, there just is a couple issues with the effects and the surround. Let's jump to another place. So I've talked a little bit about danger and safety and themes, and I'll talk about it a little bit more as well, but it is funny how just the fact that this game world is so dangerous at times, it actually adjusts how I have to make the video. In some games, I can walk through the entire world and take a boat like Witcher 3, and other titles like this, just trying to walk across it, it wouldn't be called walking the walk, it'd be called fighting the fight, because every 3 seconds you'd end up in a battle or dying from rads because you walked in some water. And of course, I'm exaggerating at that point, but I gotta tell you, I have some terrible luck sometimes making these videos when I just want a seamless walkthrough. I chose this area because I love to play this Captain Steubing looking character, or Pilot Steubing. There's a plane over here that's one more of those points of mystery that I think that Fallout 4, above any other title, even above Fallout 3, really echoes excellence in, is a completely masterwork when it comes to putting down moments of mystery. However, at the same time, it's really interesting that this location, and I'll discuss some of the barrenness that happens later, but this location appears almost as if some kid with an editor plopped down a bridge. Many times, that's the difference between Witcher 3 and Fallout 4, and even Fallout 3, is that places in Fallout 4, if they're between two places of mystery, can actually look a little bit plain, a little bit just plopped down. And the difference between, let's say, the bridge in Witcher 3 and this one, the walking bridge I showed you guys in Witcher 3, is dramatic in its feeling of organicness and its existing within that game world. I think you can notice that right away. This is an absolutely stupendous view. Just look at that for a second. That feeling of civilization finally fighting back and taking back the world just a little bit. Not a bunch, but just enough. I also like the fact that in Fallout 3, Fallout Vegas, and of course, Fallout New Vegas, and of course Fallout 4, you have a lot of the same monsters and characters, but you do have subtle differences, and you also do in the settlers themselves, and that's very cool, even in just their constructions. That's a really cool place, and it would actually be somewhat of a safer location. I mean, they couldn't burn it down, right? If you got up there and you could control anybody getting up, basically they'd have to starve you out, which they could probably do. But it would take a long time if you were already smart enough to know to build up there on that concrete overpass. I love that feeling of fictional wonder. Now, we can talk about the shivering bush syndrome. In Witcher 3, one of my major issues I've had with that game is the fact that it's obvious that their physics system didn't come to grips with the power that they had, especially on the consoles, and so they adjusted that physics system to be far less accurate. And you end up having shivering tree syndrome, which is the trees looking like they're all cold. You have that here as well, and it's sort of sad. I think that it's just very difficult for companies to figure out a way to get a close approximation of wind going through bushes and through trees and also doing that without just killing the resources. You have to have resource management when you're building a game. You can't do everything. GTA 5, I think, is the closest to feeling like it did everything, and even in that game you can see where distinctive and definitive shortcuts have been made. But you do have it here. Now this is a little bit shoddy work, I personally feel. Just this, like, it looks like something I would make. You just have this car flipped over. It looks very basic. In fact, this location I felt was a little sad because there is such a great memory, concrete thing going on here. You see this massive plane. It's obviously destroyed this overpass, right? It crashed during whatever bombs went off. That's great. And it gives you that feeling of, oh man, what happened here? What mystery exists here that I may find notes about or journals about, or, will I find something within the plane? Yet the location itself is actually really poorly. I mean, it's just poorly constructed. Like it's so funny because in many games, if they know that there's a mystery point, right, a point of interest, not an anchor point like I talked about earlier, but a point of interest, you would think that you would make that point of interest even more interesting visually, especially on the ground textures and stuff like that, and they didn't. It's just really an odd choice. But I do like this location. I like to sort of take stock of my location as Pilot Stubing. And the bad animation. We see that every time. Every single game that comes out from these guys, somebody goes in and fixes the animations. And I just really wish, I know that the game is built around modability, but man, I absolutely wish that they would fix those animations prior. Because if a mod maker makes new animations for it, it doesn't suddenly break the modability of the title. And that's one of the problems I have whenever anybody says, this game's supposed to be this way, so this is why they took a shortcut. And then you see somebody add it, and it doesn't stop the game from working, and it certainly doesn't stop it from, going back to vanilla even. All right, now let's go to the city. So one of the reasons why I wanted to go to the city is I wanted to talk a little bit more, or a little bit, about themes and sub-themes. I had mentioned this at the starting of the video about danger and safety. I think let's talk about the major theme and why theme is important and why it is important to the composition of a title. Theme is very important to a title because I think intrinsically, whatever the theme is how you experience the title, or at the very least how the developers develop the title to make you experience it a certain way. Fallout 4's theme is family. Just bear with me for a second. I think it's family. I think everybody can mostly agree with that. And family, the good, the bad of family interactions, and that magnetic push-pull that occurs depending on your interactions with your family, right? Attracting you to seek it out or run from it, depending. But there are sub-themes. For example, in this game, I think the sub-themes are safety and danger. Those are intrinsically interacting with the main theme. For example, in this game, your search is for a family member. And that means that safety and danger are big here. If you die, you have to start over. You might not have got to your quest point. There's a penalty, I'll say, for dying, but not a true penalty. It doesn't stick with you or anything. But when it comes down to it, you have this safety versus danger. If your search is for family, then safety would be places that you could stop shortly, rest up, and then continue on. You would, of course, want to continue on because the game will try to drive you emotionally to finish goals, the goals being the main quest points. And maybe the danger is, of course, as you know, not healing up all the way, not resting, not worrying about rads, and going forward and dying. But at the same time, that danger could be ultimately rewarding because you might finish that quest earlier, you might get to a place, and you might not have to use that last rad pack you have, okay? So you have those three things working in complete tandem, and I guarantee you look at any title, and you can guess their themes and sub-themes, and if you do, you can identify how the game's put together. You can even identify how cities will most likely be put together, because all of that will pay off for the developer to make it all make sense at an emotional and instinctual level so that the gamer understands how to encounter it. Now, let's change the entire theme of the game from family to just questing. Let's say that this is a game where somebody removes the emotional throughput that occurs within the goal. They take the goal completely out and they're like, okay, there's no family involved in this. It's simply about going and maybe making some outposts and leveling up. In fact, some people play that way, and I'm sure there'll be mods that remove the main story. Okay, so if that happens, then when you really think about it, safety within the game, because safety and danger are still going to be your sub-themes, safety would be places that instead of stopping at shortly to move forward in the emotional content of the game, you would actually be there to shore up your character, make them as mighty, as strong as possible. And we've seen this in other games where some places you stop really quickly and it's like quick rest or long rest, you know, and, well, I want a quick rest because I want to move on, because it would pay off to move on. I got to get out of here, right? But instead, here, if your questing is just for questing's sake, well, then I'm going to shore up my character. I'm going to make him a tank. I'm going to make him as strong as possible because nothing is stopping me from holding out and not moving forward. And I think that that's really cool, because once you understand that, you can understand how the entire game is going to be met out. You can understand even how much resources a really difficult battle will take. You know, will it take a large amount of my healing resources? Will it take a large amount of my hit points? Well, you can tell, because a game developer, a good one at least, is going to build out the game world based on those overriding themes. They're going to be playing it, and their play testers, even within the company, are going to say, hey, listen, there's no emotional resonance with this quest. It doesn't move me forward. Somebody's going to say, okay, what do we do? Do we move them forward visually? Do we put something in the area that'll draw a gamer's eye? Most gamers' eyes, at least. Do we put loot in the way? And that has happened. We've seen games where you're playing and you're like, you know what? I think this is a loot trail. This is quite simply an M&M trail to whatever place I need to go to. And that's one way a game developer can get you to move forward in game design. So go look at any other game, and I guarantee you, if you can identify their themes, you can identify how the game world will most likely be put together. In fact, a lot of people would say, well, you know, safety and danger, they exist. You know, I've said this before, but they exist in every game. No, they don't. Because if you look at Just Cause 3, it's basically the difference between performing an awesome stunt or dying while performing an awesome stunt. There really isn't a ton of loss of any kind when you die. In fact, I would go as close as to say there's none. I talked about verticality at the starting of this video, and once again, you're entering a city. These guys are just known for this. You're entering a city and you're descending into it. And one thing I love is you can do this in different ways. You can descend into a wide area, which is what they've chosen, which gives you a feeling of exploration, but also ultimately, I think, a little bit of power. You're a tiny bit, you know, if you've been playing the game, you've probably gone up a couple levels, you have explored a couple places, and just like Megaton, you're entering into an area. But with Megaton, it was a little bit closed off because you were funneled. Here, there's a tiny bit of a funnel just for the loading, and then you see that area itself. And there's multiple ways they could do this. If they did it ascending, where you were walking up into a place, well, there's a little bit more of an air of mystery and also an air of power to that. Here, you're descending into the dregs, but it's you who sort of has a little bit more confidence in that, and that is completely subconscious. I'm sure they probably decided to do that. They decided to put it in a coliseum, but I love how they did so. I really think that that's cool, because it does absolutely pay off when it comes to how the characters feel and interact in this location. Also, again, BioShock Infinity, just some of the art, the colors, there's a pastel, even in the neons, there's this pastel look to things. Okay, so people have complained about this, and I'm going to agree completely. The Bethesda games just absolutely have an issue with day-night cycle, and how the day-night cycle doesn't interact as much of the environment as it should, including items. Here, to get away with that and add some realism, they put a guard with a baseball bat. I just don't think that does a good job at all of reflecting locations and a real lived-in feel. It's definitely a ding against these titles, and always has been, and it's obvious to pay back people who have lockpicking and thievery as their skills. Now, jumping quickly to another location, this is a very interesting area. First, this train and the textures, that weathered look, everything is done so well, and I'm going to be able to show you and walk you through some areas where they did a great job on modeling. For some reason, I had never seen this in my game, and I found it a couple days ago when I was doing a walk in the walk or doing some of this video, and I just saw this location. It's so varied. There's at least 2 4-way intersections here, but you have this unique looking train, and what we're going to do is walk down the train tracks, and they've even modeled out the bend of a train track due to inertial stresses, due to landscape stresses. They have it sort of bending left and right, which is very cool. You see it in earthquake zones. You see it in Japan after their earthquake there, where a lot of those railroad tracks are bent and twisted. And here on the left, you see the axles and wheels blown right off. This is such a great look to it, an absolutely incredible feel. Also, that interplay of light and dark, the shadows here, really great. One cool thing you'll see, graphically is that whenever my shadow falls upon grass, you'll see the grass will blur out that shadow and remove that really sharp line. And it's just one little thing that they did that I really like, that, you know, some games wouldn't have even had that in there. I'm looking around here. Let's see. I just love the fact that you see this one, it's got 2, and I think 2 is normal, and you see this one here, and it's that air of mystery where your brain's like, wait a minute, where is the other one, number 1, and number 2, where's the actual entire railroad car? Like, is it on somebody's house? Here's cool because it reminds me a little bit of people who planted during the Dust Bowl. They would plant beside their crops. They would plant weeds, trees, if they could, besides crops, and that would keep the dirt from moving. In fact, one of the major causes of the Dust Bowl was the reuse of the earth multiple times until it just had nothing left. And that dirt, when the wind would blow, would just blow around. It would create the Dust Bowl. And I love that here you see that this grass here, these little bushes on the right, they remind me of that for some reason. You'll see that if you go to orchards, you go to farmland, a lot of times you'll see that line of trees between 2 farmlands. And this is cool, just a little tiny, just the little registration stamp there for that railroad tie, or not railroad tie, I'm sorry, but that light pole. And here just the broken off pieces covered in that thick weed. Somebody from the Pacific Northwest like myself, I'm telling you right away, that is exactly what you would see. Like, it's got a cool feeling. I know this is in Boston, but you know, obviously some of the plants are the same, and it just really feels real. This, not so much. Once again, you have an incredible amount of resources not being used in just this area here. And so, for example, you have a character that's maybe 40 feet away who's starving to death and begging you for money, and there's about $800,000 worth of tires in this area. And if anybody knows anything about tires, the reuse of tires for all manner of things, from building to using as, you know, resources for burning. There's just hundreds of reasons you would use it in a survivability aspect. The sad fact that they don't do that, and that they have tons of people running around needing things or starving to death or stealing when they could walk 10 feet and be a millionaire, is sort of odd. It would be the equivalent of you or I walking in the woods, and just every 40 or 50 feet there would be a car jacked up, but it would be pretty pristine. You could basically just grab that thing, you could hire a tow truck to pick it up, and make yourself a couple $100 from scalping it or something. I mean, there's just resources laying everywhere. Right here you can see, look at those railroad tracks bent from that initial stress of land moving. This is cool, but again, ultimately a little confusing because there is no road to this area. You just see some cars. And we do know, like I said already 2 or 3 times, that the developers did have some issues initially creating the game world and running out of ideas of what to put in it. And they had, even Todd Howard himself had noticed too many, tires and stuff like that. I think you see that in Fallout 4, more so in Fallout 4 than any other title prior. And it's really a ding against it in the reality aspect, but many gamers won't notice it. I mean, let's be honest, many gamers won't notice it. If they're okay with me walking around with my Captain Steubing hat on, they're going to be okay with anything. Such a great view. Look at that. There's such an air of explorability to that. And it was really hard for these guys to identify how they were going to create their skyscrapers and how they were going to create their buildings. Were built after the supposed bomb drop, and so they had to do some designs on their own and sort of identify how they were going to get that good picturesque cityscape. That is actually a sweet car. I love as you encroach up here, things just start to look a little bit drier, and if you think about it, railroad tracks, especially going over something, this is exactly what would happen, is the water runoff here would be higher than anywhere else. And they've actually peeled out a lot of the vegetation so that it really feels like the water, there's not enough water ever settling here to really grow anything. And so you get that slowly, you get a little bit more of a dry out here. And then up here with the rocks, you get a change in color of the flora. And that is sort of a reminder that, what can grow would be different than in some of the other areas. It's just a cool attention to detail I think the artists had. So I think that'll be it for this Walking the Walk. As a whole, I would judge this title as having a really interesting world, but one that you can definitely see that there were problems during the development, problems that they've been very open with, including the repetitiveness of items and piles of items just being left around the game world. You can really see that. You can see some of the issues they had with architecture and building, but at the same time, the game world is incredibly varied, absolutely interesting, and I think those anchor points that I discussed earlier, the cities, the anchor points, and your ability to build settlements absolutely adds to the underlying value of the title, because there's a lot of questing there. There's a lot of just different style of gameplay that didn't exist in Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas. So anyway, if you liked this video, hit like. If you disliked it, hit dislike. Share, maybe check out the Patreon, show it up on a forum, whatever. As always, peace out.